Welcome to your lesson video for Unit 2, Geography and the Age of Exploration. This is a new unit, so let's start by taking a peek at some of our focus questions and key concepts. And we'll start today by talking about why European explorers came to the Americas. We're going to see how the Age of Exploration began when European explorers started looking for a new trade route to Asia. And we'll see that during the Age of Exploration, the spread of new knowledge and inventions helped explorers travel further than ever before. This unit is really about what I consider to be the biggest event in human history, the so-called discovery of America by European explorers in 1492. This event changes the world forever, and it shapes much of the world's history for the next 500 years, right up to the present day. Since we're talking about geography and exploration, obviously you're going to need to have some map skills for this unit to make sense. So we'll start with the two maps located in the back of your unit packet, and we're going to focus first on the map on the left, which is a map of the continents. And we're going to label these continents starting with the continent of Europe, the continent of Africa, and the continent of Asia. So please label those continents in your unit packet, and also add the term Old World, which is used to describe these three continents. But that term Old World is really only from the perspective of Europeans, because there was a whole other world, the New World, North America and South America. So please label North and South America the New World. Also, sometimes you'll hear me call both continents, North and South America, the Americas. So if I say the Americas, I'm referring to that entire half of the world, which Europeans would call the New World. And we can also label Australia, although Australia does not really come into play in this unit. It's not really part of our story, nor is Antarctica, which would be located down here. So we're going to focus on that continent of Europe first. Europe is a continent. Remember, the continents are land masses. They're places. Remember, the continents are just basically land that sticks up out of the water, right? So Europe is a continent, but on that continent, there are many different countries. So we're going to have you just try to name a few European countries. I'll give you a minute to brainstorm a few, and then we'll talk about it. So I'm sure you came up with many different European countries: the country of France, the country of Italy, Portugal, England, and the most important country in our story for this unit, the country of Spain. So one thing I want you to understand here is the term European. If you say someone is European, what you're saying is they're from a country located on the continent of Europe. So if I'm from France, I would say I'm French, but you could also say I'm European. Italians are Europeans. The French are Europeans. If you're from Portugal, you would say I'm Portuguese, but you could also say I'm European. So you hear me use that term throughout this unit, European, and it just refers to anyone coming from the continent of Europe. But for people living in Europe in the year 1492, this was their world. This was all that they knew. They had no idea that North and South America even existed. They knew about Asia, and they knew about Africa. And they knew that there was an ocean off to the west, the Atlantic Ocean, which they called the Sea of Darkness. And there are a lot of terrifying stories about sea serpents and monsters and terrible storms, and it was a scary place for European sailors before 1492. One of the reasons why Europeans and even Africans and Asians were not able to really explore this area and find out the truth about the Atlantic Ocean is that they didn't have the ability to determine longitude and latitude. And this is a big problem, because if you can't determine longitude and latitude, then you really can't sail out of sight of the land, because once you do, you're completely lost. You won't know what direction you're going in. So on a map, the lines of longitude are these lines that go up and down. And if you notice, as I'm pointing out each of these lines, I'm moving further to the west on this map. If I move this way, I'm moving east. So lines of latitude, although they go up and down on a map, what they really show you is how far to the east or how far to the west you have traveled. Lines of latitude are the opposite. They are horizontal lines, kind of like runs of a ladder. And that's how you might remember the term. Latitude, a ladder. As you're climbing a ladder, you're going up, right? On a map, as you're moving up these lines of latitude, you're moving to the north. As you climb down a ladder and you move down these lines of latitude, you're moving south on a map. So lines of latitude help you tell how far to the north or south you've traveled, and lines of longitude on a map tell you how far to the east or to the west. And the problem is that European explorers at this time really couldn't explore much at all, because again, once they sailed off the coast and they couldn't see land anymore, they didn't know where longitude and latitude were. But then along came a couple important inventions. The compass, which allowed sailors to tell which direction was north, which direction was south, east, and west. And this interesting device, the astrolabe, which would allow European sailors to tell how far to the north and south they had gone. So 3 inventions that made Europeans better sailors and explorers in the 1400s were the magnetic compass, the astrolabe, and also the lantine sail, which allowed ships to sail better and to move in different directions in the wind. And Europeans were motivated. They wanted access to trade goods from Asia, like spices and silk and exotic foods, and there was a lot of money to be made if you could get to Asia, which, by the way, the Europeans sometimes called the Indies. So you will hear that term frequently, the Indies, which really refers to these islands off the coast of India. But before 1492, there were only 2 ways to get to Asia and to have access to these trade goods that the Europeans wanted. They could cross the Mediterranean Sea and take the land route to Asia, like this, or they could sail around Africa, starting, let's say, here in Portugal, sail around the tip of Africa, and then cross the Indian Ocean. But there were problems with both of these routes. First of all, the Italians controlled the Mediterranean Sea and would not let other European countries like Spain and Portugal take that route. The Arab merchants controlled the land route to Asia and charged high prices for trade goods. And sailing around the tip of Africa to the Indies was long and dangerous. You had to sail around this, which is called the Cape of Good Hope. I call it the Cape of Good Luck. This is where 3 giant oceans collide. A very dangerous route around the tip of Africa. But European explorers did try it. The Portuguese were somewhat successful, first exploring the coast of Africa and then sailing around the Cape of Good Hope. And later in 1498, they actually got to India by taking that route. But the problem is it took so long. It was like a 2-year voyage. So along comes Christopher Columbus, who has a different plan. He was an Italian explorer, but he was actually hired by Spain. And his plan was to sail west across the Sea of Darkness to the Indies and to Asia, with the goal of finding a cheaper and quicker trade route. But there were two problems with Columbus's plan. First of all, he thought the world was a lot smaller than it was. So he expected that the journey from Spain to Asia or the Indies would only be about 2,700 miles, when in reality, it's over 13,000. He also didn't know that North and South America were in the way. Nevertheless, he made the journey, and in October of 1492, Columbus and his men landed on an island in the Caribbean Sea. And he called these islands the Indies because he thought he had reached Asia. Now, Columbus and later explorers, who we call the conquistadors, ended up taking over and claiming all of this land for Spain. In fact, they took over huge chunks of North and South America. Now, this is Spain, and yet this is all of the land that they eventually controlled in North and South America, because basically they got there first, and their explorers conquered their way across these continents. That also explains why Columbus is not exactly a popular guy among indigenous peoples of North and South America. Indigenous means the native peoples. And this is always a controversy on Columbus Day. Should we really be celebrating this holiday? So-called holiday. Was Columbus a hero or was he a villain? We're not going to get into that now. But I will say that that date, the date that we celebrate, or at least we recognize in October of each year, it is an important date, for better or for worse. Perhaps the single most important date in world history is the date that these two continents finally reunited. Because one thing to keep in mind is, after the last ice age, when the land bridge up here was flooded, from this point on, North and South America were completely cut off from the rest of the world until 1492. Now, we believe there were some Vikings who made some small expeditions and perhaps landed in Greenland or even northern Canada prior to this, but they didn't stick around. It was in 1492 and the years after that these continents, Old World and New World, were again reunited, and now you have people, plants, animals being traded back and forth across these continents and moving back and forth across these two continents. So Columbus Day, should you celebrate it? Well, it certainly was an important date in world history, again, for better or for worse. So now let's take a look at the second map in your unit packet, which shows Central America and the Caribbean. And let me show you first off what you're really looking at here. What the map is showing, what your map 2 is showing, is this box here, which is the area between North and South America, which we often call Central America. It includes countries like Mexico, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, countries that you probably heard of, but maybe didn't know exactly where they were. So the first thing I would recommend, because this map does not have any shading, is for you yourself to shade in the water, which is, I've indicated, is blue here on the map. If you have trouble seeing that, then you'll want to shade it in. The land is here, and we do have some boundary lines here between countries. So this is what we will call also a political map, because it shows the differences, the borders between different countries and their governments. This is land. This is land. All the way down here, this is South America. You might recognize Florida is here. But let's start with the water. I'm going to have you label the Caribbean Sea, which is this area here. Also, the Atlantic Ocean over here. This is all the Atlantic Ocean. And the Pacific Ocean, there's not a spot for it, but I do want you to label it. And as far as land, there's a lot of islands here in the Caribbean region. I'm not going to make you memorize all of them or test you on all of them, but I would like you to know some important ones for this unit would be Cuba, this long island here. And this island here, which is one of the islands explored by Columbus, he called it Hispaniola. Today it's two countries, Haiti on one side and the Dominican Republic on the other side. And another area which the conquistadors, the Spanish explorers, took over and eventually controlled, this area here, which today we call Mexico. So we'll be taking a closer look at how the Spanish were able to take over this region and colonize it and control it. But for this video, let's just review our key points, which helped us answer the focus question, why did European explorers come to the Americas? Well, Europeans became better sailors and explorers in the 1400s thanks to new inventions like the compass and the astrolabe. European countries like Portugal and Spain were looking for a faster trade route to Asia and the Indies. And Christopher Columbus sailed west across the Atlantic Ocean trying to reach Asia, but bumped into the Americas instead. After that, Spanish explorers took over large parts of the Americas in the years that followed. So thanks for watching. This video helped preview your two core readings for this unit, Causes of European Exploration and Spanish Conquest in the Americas.